Imagine a lavish wedding venue filled with laughter, sparkling chandeliers, and elegantly dressed guests. Among them, a wealthy man steps arm in arm with someone no one expected, an unassuming homeless black woman. The air grows still as heads turn, whispers spreading like wildfire. Who is she? Why is she here? And why is he, of all people, bringing her to this wedding, his ex-fiancée's wedding? This story begins with a chance encounter. A man of means, burdened by his own regrets, stumbles upon a woman struggling to survive. She's been overlooked, judged, and ignored by society, yet her spirit shines through in ways no one can ignore. Moved by her resilience, he offers her an invitation to a world she could have only dreamed of. But what happens next is something no one, not even the man himself, could have foreseen. Beneath her warm clothes and quiet demeanor lies a strength and courage that will challenge perceptions and shatter expectations. At the wedding, her actions leave everyone speechless, turning what could have been an ordinary event into an unforgettable moment that would echo through the lives of everyone there. What does she do that changes everything? And why did this wealthy man take such an extraordinary step to bring her into his world? Keep watching as this story of kindness, courage, and redemption unfolds in ways you won't see coming. This is more than just a story about wealth or appearances. It's about humanity and the power of unexpected connections. The wedding was already the talk of the town, a grand affair where every detail screamed perfection. For the bride, it was the ultimate symbol of her new life. For the groom, it was a display of wealth and status. But when the man walked in with his unexpected guest, it was as if time stood still. The woman clung to his arm nervously, her eyes scanning the room filled with judgmental stares and whispered questions. She wasn't dressed like the other guests. Her gown, while elegant, seemed out of place among the designer ensembles. Yet, there was a quiet confidence in the way she held herself that no one could ignore. What most people didn't know was how they met. Just days earlier, he had seen her sitting on a park bench, clutching a worn backpack and staring off into the distance. Something about her expression stopped him. She wasn't begging or asking for help. She looked proud, even in her struggle. Intrigued, he offered her a warm meal, and the conversation revealed layers of a life marked by hardship, but also incredible strength. Now, here she was, stepping into a world she'd never been part of before. But she wasn't just there to observe. She had a purpose, a quiet determination that even he didn't fully understand. The tension in the room grew thicker as the bride caught sight of them, her smile faltering for just a second. Whatever was about to happen, one thing was clear: this wasn't going to be an ordinary wedding. As the bride's eyes locked on the unexpected pair, her carefully curated composure cracked for just a moment. Her gaze darted between the man she once loved and the woman at his side. The murmurs in the room grew louder, but he stood tall, ignoring the crowd's curiosity. The woman at his side, though clearly nervous, met the bride's stare with quiet dignity. The tension in the air was palpable. Some guests whispered, speculating about who she was: a distant relative, a bold statement. Others exchanged knowing looks, as if this was some calculated move by the man to upstage the bride. But none of them knew the truth. None of them knew the story that had brought this woman to this very moment. Meanwhile, the groom shifted uncomfortably, sensing the unease ripple through the room. He leaned toward his soon-to-be wife, whispering something, but she barely responded. Her eyes stayed fixed on the woman, a mixture of disbelief and suspicion flickering across her face. At the same time, across the room, the woman could feel the weight of 1,000 stares. But it wasn't anger or bitterness that filled her, it was resolve. She had come here not to humiliate or seek revenge, but to prove something, not just to them, but to herself. The man at her side noticed the slight tremble in her hand and gave it a reassuring squeeze. "You're doing great," he murmured. But deep down, even he didn't know how the rest of the evening would unfold, or the secrets it might uncover. The reception hall buzzed with conversations, yet every now and then, eyes darted back to the unlikely guest. She kept her head high, but inside, her heart raced. Every moment in this room felt like stepping into a fire, but she reminded herself of why she was here. She wasn't just someone the wealthy man had plucked from the streets for show. There was something bigger at stake. She just hoped she was ready for it. The bride, unable to ignore the growing tension, finally broke away from her circle of guests and approached them. Her walk was deliberate, her smile polite but sharp, like a blade hidden in silk. "Well, this is a surprise," she said, her tone sweet but loaded. Her eyes barely flicked to the woman before locking onto the man. "I wasn't expecting you to bring company." The man returned her smile, calm and unwavering. "I thought it was time for a little change. Besides, you always said I lacked a sense of adventure." The woman stood silently, feeling the bride's scrutiny like a spotlight. She wanted to shrink away, but she held her ground. There was something about this moment, something important. She could feel it. As the bride's polite facade began to crack, the groom joined them, offering a strained smile. "Everything all right here?" he asked, though it was clear he sensed the undercurrent of tension. The bride didn't answer right away, her focus still on the woman. "Yes," she finally said, but her voice carried a challenge. "I'm just trying to understand what brings her here." The woman finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Maybe it's time you understood." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Whatever was about to happen, it was clear it would leave an impact no one would forget. The bride's smile tightened, her eyes narrowing as if she were trying to peel back the layers of the woman standing before her. But before she could say anything, the man interjected. "This isn't just about the wedding," he said, his voice calm but with an edge that hinted at something deeper. "It's about facing the truths we've all been avoiding." The bride's expression faltered for a brief moment before she quickly recovered. "Truths," she echoed, her voice laced with suspicion. "And what exactly does she have to do with any of this?" The room seemed to grow quieter, as if even the walls were leaning in to listen. The woman stepped forward slightly, her nerves still present but overshadowed by a newfound determination. "I think you already know," she said, her gaze locking onto the bride. Her voice was firm now, carrying a weight that made even the groom shift uncomfortably. Whispers rippled through the crowd. The tension between the four of them was impossible to ignore. The bride's carefully constructed image of control began to waver as something clicked in her mind. Her eyes darted between the man and the woman, realization dawning but not fully forming. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice rising slightly. "Whatever game you're playing, it's not going to work." But the man didn't back down. "This isn't a game," he replied. "It's time for the truth to come out." Before anyone could respond, an older woman, seated near the head table, suddenly stood. Her voice, calm but authoritative, cut through the murmurs. "Maybe it's time we all stop pretending," she said, her eyes fixed on the bride. Gasps rippled through the room, and the bride's face turned pale. The woman at the man's side glanced toward him, confusion mingling with her resolve. Whatever secrets had been buried were about to rise to the surface, threatening to unravel everything, and everyone, in that room. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to the older woman. Her presence commanded attention, and her words carried the weight of something long hidden. The bride froze, her mask of composure slipping further with each passing second. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. The older woman stepped forward, her gaze steady. "I stayed quiet for years, thinking it wasn't my place," she said, her voice calm yet firm. "But seeing her here today," she gestured toward the homeless woman, "it's clear that the truth has a way of finding its moment." The man nodded, his jaw tightening as he turned to the bride. "You've always been good at controlling the narrative, haven't you?" he said, his tone sharper now. "But you can't control this anymore." The bride's eyes widened as the homeless woman finally spoke. "I didn't come here to ruin your day," she began, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "I came because I deserve answers too." She looked at the older woman, then back at the bride. I think you already know who I am." The bride's face turned pale, and the room seemed to hold its breath. "This can't be," she whispered, shaking her head. But the truth was undeniable. The homeless woman was her half-sister, the result of an affair her father had tried to bury long ago. The final twist came when the older woman revealed her role in the story. "I was the one who raised her after your father walked away," she said, her voice tinged with both sorrow and strength. "She's not here to take anything from you. She's here to claim what's always been hers, her place in this family." The bride's anger gave way to a mix of guilt and shock as she looked at her half-sister. For the first time, the carefully constructed walls she had built around her life began to crumble. The man, watching the scene unfold, turned to the woman he had invited and said softly, "You've shown more courage than anyone in this room." As the truth settled over the wedding, the crowd remained stunned. The homeless woman didn't ask for forgiveness or acceptance. She simply stood tall, knowing she had finally reclaimed her story. And with that, the man led her out of the room, leaving behind a silence that spoke louder than any words ever could. As they stepped out into the cool evening air, the woman let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The man glanced at her, a small, reassuring smile on his face. "You were incredible in there," he said softly. She shook her head, her voice breaking slightly. "I wasn't sure I could do it, but I had to, for myself." Back inside, the wedding continued, but the atmosphere had changed. The bride stood by the window, staring into the distance. The truth she had spent years avoiding was now undeniable, and though it hurt, it also cracked open something she hadn't felt in years, an opportunity to make things right. For the first time, she wasn't thinking about appearances or perfection. She was thinking about family. The older woman approached her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's not too late," she said simply. The bride nodded, her voice soft. "I need time, but I want to try." Meanwhile, the woman and the man walked through the city streets, a quiet understanding passing between them. For her, this was more than a confrontation. It was the start of something new. For him, it was a reminder of what truly mattered: courage, connection, and the power of truth. As they parted ways, she turned back to him and smiled. "Thank you for seeing me." He nodded, watching her disappear into the night, knowing they had both changed each other's lives in ways neither of them could have predicted.